Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, and we have a very special guest with us today. It's Marty Ozinga the fourth. That's an important number because he runs a fifth-generation business, same company name as the last name, Ozinga. If you're in the Midwest or in Florida, you've probably seen the concrete mixing trucks with the red and white stripes driving around your neighborhood. Now you know who's running that show. Marty, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jeff. It's good to be with you.
It's so much fun to have you here. And we were just talking before recording. Most family businesses don't make it past the third generation. And so you've done that. I'm sure that's not easy. Can't wait to kind of get into that whole story. But before we go to the business part, if you don't mind, we always kind of start with just where you grew up. I know you're in Chicago now, but like, where'd you grow up? What was your family like? Did they suck you into the family business at 12? You know, what kind of upbringing did you have?
Yeah, I'm fourth generation in the business. I have 5 younger brothers, and we're the business has been around since 1928. We're 97 years in business this year. Actually, the Ozinga family came from the Netherlands in 1893 to Chicago. And it was the year of the World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Kind of, if you've heard of The Devil in the White City, the book.
Absolutely read it.
That whole history. Yeah. And it was that year, and they were farmers, and they when they came to Chicago, they were vegetable peddlers, and just selling vegetables door to door to folks. And the next generation, my great grandfather, who was the founder of our company, they ended up moving to the farm country out of the city to a village adjacent to the city of Chicago called Evergreen Park, and that's where I grew up. And many generations of our family, since they moved there in 1915, just stayed there, basically in the same couple blocks or so.
Wow.
So family members all around us. My grandpa and my grandparents lived just a few doors down, and my great grandma was like across the street, and just family members all over the place. And we grew up in this sort of small community. But I have 5 younger brothers, and throughout the generations, we have it's not very typical in a family business to be fourth generation and basically still be siblings. But throughout the generations, different family branches or different people. There's been some. They call it like pruning of the tree, or people who've sold out or along the way or whatever. So it's the 6 of us brothers now, and a cousin of ours, and then there's 32 kids amongst the 7 of us in the 5th generation. So we do call ourselves a 5th generation, but the oldest of the 5th generation is just kind of coming out of college,
right?
And started recently full time. 2 of them have started full time. So, but I grew up in and around the family business. The family business had a good reputation in the community, and people would tell me, "Well, that's a good company," or
right.
And we'd, like as you mentioned, the red and white striped trucks. We'd see them around; those were cool. It's like
It's a tangible. You know what I mean? It was like recognizable, right?
Yeah, it's a big, cool truck.
Yeah. So kids would know it.
Really
even though it wasn't to consumer, direct to consumer, I guess business to business, but visible.
Yeah.
The
So the concrete mixer truck is a pretty it's a real standout kind of piece of equipment driving around town, and ours, like as you said, had red and white stripes on it. So there's just a lot of pride, in the family name, in the company, and it had a good reputation, and it still does. And so growing up, sort of adjacent to it, I wasn't, as a little kid, wasn't working there, but there was just a lot of sort of pride around the fact that it had a good reputation, and it was a reputation that was earned through the generations. I know this podcast is a lot, talks a lot about generosity, and I think just the spirit of generosity of previous generations was very sort of a part of the ethos of giving back to coworkers and the community, and just just it was a part of the culture of the organization and the family, and I think that's where a lot of the reputation came from.
I mean, it's really amazing. I mean, I can kind of picture it, but it's also part of a big city,
Yeah.
and for a family to be that close living together actually over generations also is very interesting. You just don't hear about that much these days,
Yeah, and I think over time, that changed for sure. I mean, we
Yeah.
all kind of no one lives in that same town anymore,
Right.
and people have gone to different places. But yeah, that is the way we grew up though, and went to the same church and school,
Right.
and we all sort of were a part of a community. And it's not, I don't know, I can't speak for a lot of other parts of America, but certainly in the Chicago area, it's known as a neighborhood kind of city and
Yeah.
community. And there's a lot of like church, school type, community people, multi-generational community
Okay.
people. And even now I'll go to like a wake or a funeral of one of our coworkers, and there'll be hundreds of people that show up. And it's people that multiple generations that they grew up together, and
Yeah.
they continue, at the local parish or whatever.
Yeah.
That's still very common in our area.
Yeah.
And it's definitely like a Midwestern value, I think, of faith and family and
Yeah.
community. It's I would say it's still alive and well. It's not what it used to be, but it's still definitely a
Yeah.
part of
Yeah.
like the culture here.
So, when did any child labor at 12 years old? They drag you. I mean, it's hard to drive a cement mixer at 12, but they
Yeah,
put you to work at a warehouse someplace. When did you get dragged in
it's
first?
interesting. For I was the oldest. I am the
Yeah.
oldest of six, and I think for one reason or another, my dad just kind of didn't have us, jumping right in
Yeah. Yeah.
at that super young age,
Right.
even though they told stories of them at 11 and
I'm
12 years
sure.
old doing it. But
Yeah. The involvement
we
maybe gets later
yeah.
as
But
the need for cheap labor maybe goes down. But
yeah, maybe that was the issue
yeah.
probably, like at some point it's just like, hey, I don't want my kids to get hurt at, like around this heavy
Exactly.
equipment.
Right.
But it was more of probably a necessity when they were,
Right.
doing.
Exactly.
But yeah, I ended up actually working. The first summers I worked at the company was not until like college
Yeah.
age.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. But
work summers in
you went
college.
off to California for school, right?
Yeah, so I graduated from Westmont College, it's a Christian college in Santa Barbara. Met my wife there, and then we moved to Chicago after I graduated, and I went right into working for the family business.
What'd you study?
I was economics and business, kind of an entrepreneurial studies bend to things. Yeah.
And did you already kind of know that's where you were going to go, or did you kind of consider some other stuff?
I think, when I was in college, it was sort of the dot-com internet boom.
That's
And,
true.
I thought I was going to be some overnight, dot-com guy. But
It was going to be Ozinga.com and
yeah. Jeff
yeah,
Bezos beat me to it, like, but, the doors open, doors close. And, I had some different ideas. But, when I had worked at the family business, as I said, in the
yeah, during
summers in
summers.
college, and I really enjoyed the
Yeah,
experience.
yeah,
And so when I came out of school, I was happy to come work full time at the family business.
yeah. And then how long was it till you went back to, you went and got your master's at Northwestern, right?
Yeah,
How
that
many
was a
years?
part-time program, I think in
Okay.
2010.
What
So,
was the driver
it's
with that?
been, I just always had it in my head that I wanted to, go back to school and get a graduate degree, and that one seemed like a good fit at the time. And Northwestern, it's just a good institution, good program. It's fairly, close to where I was, and
Yeah.
um, yeah, just logistically, it just
Made
all
it
worked out
easy.
okay.
And
Yeah,
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 and we,
yeah,
we talked about this off the recording, but my daughter went to undergrad there, so I've spent a lot of time in Evanston. It's a cool
yeah.
little,
Great
yeah,
school.
it's a great place, man.
Yeah, yeah, great school. I went up to Evanston like on the weekends,
Yeah,
and
exactly. And
and
you studied communications though, like not an MBA.
yeah, yeah. It was a communications degree, and I felt like at the time it was a lot of things that were sort of germane to the things that I was dealing with at work, and I think it probably had a lot of impact on me as far as, you know, just leadership in general
Yeah.
with regards to, you can never communicate too much.
So
You really
true.
can't. So
Isn't your job communication
amazing.
anyway?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Just
really?
it's like I constantly learn that you just can't find enough ways to get the message out and cascade the message throughout the organization. It's a constant art to it all that and that's why we're happy to jump on podcasts and other things. It's
Right.
just continue to put the megaphone to our story and get the word out and see what relationship come as a result of it. So.
Well, I'd like to get into kind of how you message some of that stuff, but maybe we can sort of weave that into your kind of moving along the organization. So it's been a while, you've been in there. I mean, what was the kind of career path? How did how did you kind of get from starting right out of school to running the joint?
Yeah, so I think, my dad's philosophy, as was previous generations' philosophy, because of the nature of the family business, you go back to my great grandfather, the founder, he was sort of tired by the time his sons were old enough to take responsibility, to take leadership in the business. And so when they were teenagers, more or less, he handed the business. He went to work after sixth grade, my
Right.
great grandfather. And so the second generation, they got uh, put right into the
Thrown into
ownership
the fire pretty
leadership.
young. Yeah.
Yeah, very young age, and actually right before World War II, and they actually all
Mm,
went off to World War II and came
mm,
back. But then my dad had the experience of being able to be general manager of the company at 23 years of age.
mhm.
And so his philosophy was very much around, young people have ambition. If they have enthusiasm and they're really interested, give people as much responsibility as possible, as quickly as possible.
Mm,
And that's what he did with me and all my brothers. And so as quickly as possible, like all of us were given a fair amount of responsibility as
mm.
quickly as possible. And in 2012. My dad called the seven of us together and said, I'm firing myself. He was president of the company at the time, and I'm gonna leave the room, and it's up to you guys to figure out how to organize yourselves
Wow.
going forward. Yeah. Who's taking my job, and
Right,
what
right.
jobs you're gonna take from there, and the seven of us once my dad left the room, the seven of us were able to work it out amongst each other.
That's a cool
Yeah.
story, man.
Yeah, it was really sort of a
That is
wonderful
very
thing.
uncommon.
Yeah,
Don't you think? I mean, I've
yeah,
never heard that
it is
before.
uncommon, and a lot of people think probably it's a little weird. But
I kind of like it.
yeah,
One of the
for
things we
me, it was
talk.
it was
Yeah,
it was really a blessing because my peers affirmed me in the position that I
exactly.
had. It wasn't just dad saying who's doing what and who's in charge and everybody listen to him. It was really ultimately it was a decision that was collectively made by my peer group. And and then from there it was all about like, hey, how do we actually steward this together? How do we shoulder this responsibility? I'm not in this, lonely at the top kind of thing. I'm gonna,
Right.
everybody's gonna be in here with me, figuring out how do we do this together. If you want to call it first among equals or whatever, fine. But other than that, we're all equal partners, and we all need to work together. And we ended up spending a fair amount of time starting to strategize right then and there about how do we move forward. And my dad thought the meeting would be about a 5-minute meeting because he just thought, we're going to make this decision and then, go
Off we go.
forward. But we started having fun right off the bat. Like, hey, I'm thinking this way and that way, and like you do this and you do this, and we were in there for probably at least a couple hours, and he
Yeah.
started sort of pacing outside of there, wondering if he had made a mistake, if it was wasn't going like the way he.
Right.
But in the end, it was a real blessing. And we've worked. That was 2012. We are in 2025, and we're still all together, and things
That's
have changed and evolved, but we continue to be a cohesive group, and we continue to put in the work of making sure it is that way. A lot of trust building, and we spend at least once a month where we come together and try not to talk about work, and we just have like a prayer time together,
hmm.
where we just listen to each other on how we're doing. Whether it's at home or whatever, and we find that. Just making sure that we're doing those kind of check-ins and praying for each other, that it really builds sort of trust amongst each other.
I think that is critical. I don't know if you've read Lead with Prayer,
I
yet,
haven't.
but that's a pretty new book out there that Peter Greer and some of his buddies wrote. That they interviewed a bunch of leaders, and they were talking about there's a tendency that the higher you go in leadership, kind of the less you pray, and the
Hmm.
more you there's a tendency to rely on yourself
Yeah.
more. And he was saying the people that are the most successful always maintain that culture of prayer at like the centerpiece. So I think that's cool that you guys have. I mean, that has to be intentional, man. You guys
Yeah,
got plenty to do. It's a big
we
company.
were raised, my mom was a prayer warrior, I would call her,
Uh-huh.
and
Wow.
we saw that. We would pray before, we left for school. We would pray at every meal. We'd pray before we went to bed.
Yeah.
Read the Bible and pray was just a daily part it was just a part of our ritual. Like it was almost
Yeah.
it felt funny or weird, not and
To
so it
not do
worked.
it.
Yeah, and it worked,
Yeah.
every, most meetings, certainly bigger ones, we open with prayer with folks and
Yeah.
we spend time praying together as a group and yeah, I think it's almost like the secret sauce
I was wondering
of
if so. Yeah, how do you think that is? How have you seen maybe the fruit of that?
well,
In,
I just think, when I've written about this a bit, but when you're vulnerable before God and it creates this vulnerability based trust, just automatically because you start to close your eyes, you fold your hands, you bow your head, and then you start to try to be honest before God. In our natural selves, we don't have this tendency to just be vulnerable.
it's a great point.
And we start to pray, and all of a sudden, some vulnerabilities start to come out, and then you start building trust, and you have that common foundation that we're equally yoked, so to speak, and it's also puts just all of life in perspective, like who ultimately is in charge here. It keeps us humble, and yeah, it's there's something special about it all.
Uh, and I think you're. Well, I know you're onto something here. But one thing that you said when when your dad kind of locked you in the room and said, "Figure it out." I love.
Yeah,
By the way, I mean one of our principles at Arcos is like empower, don't control. So we're always. I know I have a tendency to want to control, and I think it's a biblical principle. I think God gives us this free will. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And so, like, the
yeah.
more we can sort of teach, model, and then empower the next generation, I think your dad actually did it. Kind of a genius. Could have gone wrong, but he probably. I mean, he had to have a sense it was going to work. And one of the things you said that I think is very rare uh, is that you all have an equal. Even though you're the CEO, you all have an equal share.
Yeah, we do.
And obviously, not every day or every week or every month is every one of the seven of you contributing equally. It's just impossible. Somebody's on vacation. You know what I mean? I mean, like,
Right. Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
So it's very easy, I think, to get bent out of shape about who deserves what. Okay. Do you think that this maybe prayer or humility or coming together has helped in that kind of unity to, how has that
Yeah.
been helpful?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
trying
no,
to put
I
those
think
two things together. Maybe they're
I
not
think that's
tied.
a significant part about it. I think the tradition that we come from, you know, the the Ozinga, the Dutch Christian
Yeah.
Reform, John Calvin kind of influence of, this idea that all of life is an opportunity to honor and glorify God, and that ultimately we're just stewards of what He's entrusted to us. I think that's a big part of it too. This is we often talk about it like this is not ours. This is we're
Yes.
stewarding this. This is God's, and I think that also diffuses and mitigates a lot of that entitlement mentality. And we have to be reminded of it. It can creep in any hour of the day.
Exactly.
But just try to be reminded of like, hey, life is short. We are stewards of all we've been entrusted with, not just money, but our talents and our time and the relationships that we have with each other, with our coworkers, with our customers. We're trying to be good stewards. It ultimately is all entrusted to us by God. He gives, He takes away.
Yeah.
He can do whatever He pleases, and we want to honor Him with what we've been entrusted with. And ultimately it doesn't belong to us, and you certainly can't take it with you.
Yeah. No, it's really good, man. I know we started talking before we hit record. One of the things we always try to ask is just a setback story, right? Nothing's ever up and to the right perfectly. Can you share with us just some kind of setback story that you've kind of had to deal with or are dealing with or something like that?
Well, we tell a lot of these stories. Like, the company was founded in 1928. I don't know if
Yeah.
people know their history, but
Great
that's
Depression, maybe.
that's not a great time. Right
Yeah,
before
it
the
doesn't
Great
get much worse
Depression.
than
So,
that.
so we tell these stories of like right from the jump, the business, just about went out of business.
Right.
And then when my great grandfather turned it over to his sons, it was shortly after Pearl Harbor, and then all three sons got pulled into service during the war, and the
Wow.
business had to close for a while.
Wow.
We tell these stories of like, hey, we survived the Depression, we survived World War II, and there's a whole bunch of other world events that have come and gone since. Since I started my career, just over 25 years ago, there's 9/11, there's the great financial crisis.
Yeah.
There that I can say with that time, the Great Recession, some people might call it, we lost as a business 60% of our revenue or our volume over basically like a 20-month period. So we were in free fall. And we had a situation where we are we're a family business, but we're ambitious, and we use debt as leverage,
Sure.
to grow.
Oh, yeah, it's a very capital intense business.
Yeah, it's very capital intensive, and you make bets that are 5, 10, 15 years,
Right.
type of bets, and all of a sudden your business drops by 60%, and your lenders come in and have a ton of questions about all kinds of things.
Yep.
and
And they're
and
having problems.
Yeah, and they're
They're
trying
getting
to tighten up,
squeezed.
tighten up. The government's all over them. And
Exactly.
so, I mean, we've lived through some things that in the moment, you wonder, like, is it, are
Is
we
this
going to
it?
make it? Is this it? Is it,
Yeah.
is on our watch,
Right, right,
this
right.
thing going to be,
Right.
that it was a nice story, and now it's over.
Yeah.
But,
Right.
um, and I think, but more significantly than that is, when we have these like major, like sort of life events. My parents are both gone now, and they both passed very suddenly.
Mm.
And I think those are the things that rock our world more than, um, business trials, honestly. I mean, it's just like all of a sudden, the six of us, I don't want to say orphans, but I mean, without parents, there's just sort of a protective covering you have with
Yeah,
your
there
parents,
is.
especially at a fairly young age. And it was very, those two people in the six of us, our lives are just so formidable,
Yeah.
so influential. Like I said, praying for us and loving on us and encouraging us, and then for them to be gone so suddenly, like they didn't go at the same time. But my mom was 61. It was 2010. It was kind of in the throes of that Great
Mm.
Recession. And my dad passed in 21 at the age of 71. So, they're gone, and that's still hard, I think, and,
Yeah.
and has a lot of impacts on not
Does.
only our generation, but all the grandkids that had
Yeah.
relationships with grandpa and grandma and all that kind of stuff. So, those are the things that I think that are much harder than like a business trial is definitely like brings us to our knees, no doubt about it. And I don't want to diminish that at all, but I think when you lose loved ones, those are really tough too. I think particularly a dad like who was such a mentor to us and who
Yeah.
was our predecessor. And then, in a lot of respects, like I've thought about this. I talked about it at his celebration of life service. You know, Even as an adult, you want to sort of honor and please your
Yeah, you
earthly
did.
father, and you want to, show that, hey, we're stewarding well what you've entrusted to us. And when he was gone, it was sort of like, well, you know, is there still more to this? Because
Right.
part of what your frame is to please your dad, and I think he was that way with his dad too. And I think we're just wired that way as human
Yeah,
beings to
we
want
are.
to please our dad. And it might seem a little bit like you know a vulnerable thing to say, but like it's just like we have sort of dad issues, well into
No, no.
adulthood, and
That's yeah. No, I think
and
everybody wants the blessing from their father.
yeah,
And I think God made us that way
yeah,
so that
we're just wired that way,
we're
and so like
wired to
yeah,
want his blessing and our earthly father's blessing. And that's supposed to mirror,
yeah.
the way you treat your kids. And,
Yeah.
so no,
So
I
when
think that's right
when
on the
he's
money.
gone, it leaves a big hole. But you know, we're at the same time, there's some element of honoring a legacy
Absolutely.
that is really important to all of us. Not just his, but the previous generations. And what they stood for. And I think we live our lives that way of like, that commandment still stands of honoring your parents and that it may go well. It's the first one with a promise, right? That it may go well with you. And so whether they're here or not, that we want to continue to honor them, honor their legacy. And it really does drive us, I think, day in and day out.
I think that's beautiful. Let's talk about the way that plays out, man. You talked about as a kid feeling that sense of community, even beyond your family, of kind of respect for the business, and clearly that was because of the way your dad and his dad, and the employees behaved and maybe gave back to the community and that sort of thing. So, how do you think? This is the Generous Business Owner podcast. I mean, how do you? And we know generosity is about a lot of things, not just money. But how do you think about kind of continuing that culture? What is it? How do you use this platform kind of for good?
Yeah, I just tell like a maybe one quick story.
Yeah.
I lived a few doors down from my grandfather, and he would, like I said, we grew up with six boys, and there was no girls in the house. But people would often give my mom a break, one way or another.
Yeah.
And so I'd go, he'd go like he was a pilot. We'd go fly around or whatever. But one of the things that we would do sometimes is there was an old people's home not too far. We'd take a walk to it, and this guy was named as Old Bill McCall. His name was, and my grandpa would say, Old Bill, he's got a little bit of a. He'd warn me before we get there. He's going to have some like some. He's got some foul mouth. So, like you
Right. Right.
shouldn't repeat the words he says and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't know it at the time, but Old Bill was a neighbor to the concrete plant when
Mm,
they ran the concrete plant, and it was one of these situations. Who wants to really be a neighbor to a concrete plant
right.
necessarily? And so he had befriended this guy, and long after he was anywhere near the concrete plant, my dad would continue to visit him in some convalescent home.
Wow.
I'm sorry, my grandpa,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
that's just a
Yeah. Yeah.
memory that sticks with me. That my grandpa would, this guy who probably didn't have anybody left anymore,
Yeah.
but he would take us, in a relationship that he wasn't getting anything out of
Well, there's
anymore.
no, yeah, there was no business reason
There's
anymore
no
to do it.
business reason anymore
Yeah,
to
to
do
keep the neighbor
this.
happy, whatever. So,
Yeah, and I think those stories are important because
yeah,
you don't just be generous in business because of, oh, well, what's in it for us, or there's a
right.
quid pro quo, or like how does this a good business decision. And I was actually reading this morning about the Good Samaritan,
Hmm.
and that Jesus tells a story like, who is my neighbor?
Mm,
It's the second greatest commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. And who is my neighbor? The lawyer says, so who is my neighbor? And Jesus goes on to tell the good story of the Good Samaritan. It's this unlikely character who goes and helps the stranger, for no, you know, uh, you know,
there's nothing in it
there's
for him.
nothing in it for him. It's total stranger. This guy
Yeah,
who's like been beat up and robbed, and he goes and pays, for him to stay at the inn and everything else. And like, there's no sense of self-interest in the story. And if we want to be generous in spirit or with our money or whatever, I think that's where the challenge comes in. Is like, are you just doing it because of your own business reasons or your own self-interest or your accolades or whatever, or is this just like this is what being a Christ follower or living according to the principles of the Bible. It's about helping people who, there's nothing in it for you. It's just a blessing to be generous with people who you will never get anything from that. And the profound irony there is you actually do get a tremendous amount of blessing, but it's not like calculated in a way that is on a spreadsheet per se. There's just so much more to the richness of life that comes from it, and I think that's where sometimes it's hard to articulate in a way, and you can't like sort of rationalize it until you experience it, for yourself. So
man, that's so good. It's we have corporate prayer time on. We're recording this on a Wednesday, and so we have it on Wednesdays. And that topic literally came up in our prayer time today about,
mm,
you know, we have our business strategy, we have our game plan, we have our service model, all those things. But somebody started praying and everybody kind of picked up on this. Like, can we just be a blessing to everyone, whether they're a client or not?
yeah,
how do we have a heart position to do that, and then just trust for God to give us unity as a business, to give us the clients we need to survive and grow. But really, when we go up to heaven, is God going to ask us how many concrete trucks did you have? And
Yeah,
for
right.
us, how many clients did you have, and what were your assets under management? Or is he going to ask you, what'd you do with what I gave you? How'd you treat everybody?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just think
Yeah.
that's
I
such
mean,
a good reminder, man,
yeah.
because it's easy to get caught up.
It's so easy. It's so challenging to when you're busy and you're trying to, do good things, be a
Yeah,
good steward and have, there's nothing wrong with, measurement of, those KPIs that you're talking about,
yeah,
ROI or assets under management or growth,
right.
growth rates and all these other things. But if you do run the danger, I mean, Jesus talked about the things that choke out the seed, the worries of this life, the pursuit of riches, just different things that can really, you got to be on guard about. Those things can really take the life out of life. And, yeah, when it's all said and done and you've been running so hard, what's it all for? And I think those are things, regular things to ask, but it's not easy either because we get busy doing good things. It's not bad things, it's good things, but it almost too busy and too caught up in it. And it's hard to be disciplined about continuing to reevaluate, like, am I living into, like, having the biggest eternal impact that I can for all of eternity? And how do I do that? And it's not always straightforward.
Yeah, the actions come out of the heart, right? And I think it's easy to kind of turn into a Pharisee a little bit, even around giving.
Yeah,
Like you
no
you
doubt.
you could even turn your corporate giving, or even your personal giving into some legalistic
Yeah,
thing, even though it's a good activity. If your focus is on the activity and not the relationship,
right.
with God and the heart transformation, I think for me, I got to release that daily because that's
Yeah,
my natural human bent is to
yeah,
make little gods out of stuff that isn't the big one,
100%.
you know? So what's maybe another, do you have another story you could share about just kind of, I love this direction, but anything else from a platform or personal sort of generosity standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I love the history
Yeah, yeah,
stuff,
no, I love it. I mean, you have it, so use
yeah.
it.
So
Yeah.
like, so I think I've been doing a lot of history. We actually recently, in the last couple of years anyway, hired an archivist, which I
Oh,
didn't
I
even
love
know
it.
was a
A thing.
thing. But we have our 100-year anniversary coming up, and we
Yeah,
have
that's
closets
cool.
full of stuff, and
Yeah,
no
yeah.
one's got the time to actually
No, what are you
go
gonna?
through
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that
Dig it
stuff.
out. Yeah.
And so we hired someone to really go, full time preserve things and organize
That's
things, and it's really
awesome.
been a blessing. But one of the things that have come out of some of the stories from, and these things are on record, but um, the family, the business started as a coal delivery business,
Hmm.
and they were delivering to this village that they were very much a part of, and home coal was used for home heating fuel, and as
Exactly.
you know, in Chicago area, it's cold in the winter, and you'll freeze
Exactly.
to death if you're not heating your home.
Right.
So there's this predicament of starting a new startup, a new business, and being capital required, allowing your neighbors to freeze to death if they can't pay their bill
Right.
for the coal. But boy, they really sacrificed to get people coal when they needed it most, even though
Wow.
they weren't able to pay when they needed to, and really just the company's sort of on the brink, and someone might say that's foolish that you're being so
Right.
generous, and you have to be mindful of like how it doesn't help anybody to run a company out of business, but at the same time they're just in this predicament where there's in their kind of like the widow's mite, like in their poverty they're still being generous is very convicting to me. And I just think I think a lot of giving, um, I think if anything we're trying to sort out, like, what does it look like to be not only a cheerful giver, but like to where it there is some sacrifice to it that's more than, like you said, just sort of like, hey, this is just,
Right.
we have a commitment at our, it's multi-generational commitment to donate 10% of our income
Okay.
every year. And that's a wonderful legacy, and it's like one of those things that we can never meddle with. My
Right.
dad was very much like, "Hey, you guys can do whatever you want, but never meddle with that one."
Got it.
That principle. But the danger a little bit is that it's just sort of off the table and it's out of mind, and it doesn't really hurt
We've done
because
our
you
thing.
planned for it.
We did it. We're
You've done
done.
it. So how bad does it hurt when you just really just plan for it and you build it into budget and everything else? And so I think just in general, it's just really helpful, I find, is to just get out and see the impacts of those things and hear people's stories and hear how the lives are touched. We've given on an annual basis, it ends up being over 500 organizations, but to be able to go to some of these places and see firsthand, how lives are impacted, I think really keeps us humble. It puts wind in our sails. And we try to encourage our fellow coworkers to say, "Hey, every day when we do well at, living out our values and being good stewards of all the resources that we've been entrusted with and getting that ROI and everything else we try to do, uh, there's a bigger picture here that, all these lives are being impacted every time we make a dollar. A certain percentage of that is going to impact someone who really, really needs it and whose life is really being impacted. For instance, there's a home that rescues young girls, underage girls, from being sex trafficked, right in our area. And you wouldn't think that happen, that's maybe a third world thing or something, but these girls, uh, the county police or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
knows to bring them there. and
Yeah.
and to see a 12-year-old girl, I mean, if anyone has a daughter that age, I mean, just the idea that that's going on, 12, 13, 14 years old, and to be able to provide not only shelter but therapy and a Christian environment of love and nurturing. And I mean, it's just very humbling, and to know that our work gets to contribute to impacting those kind of efforts is a tremendous blessing, and it's significantly more than like, as I've said a number of times, ROI and some of the other things, even though that stuff's great fun as well. So
Love it. All right. Well, as we kind of wrap it up, Marty, we always like to try to have some kind of practical tip for somebody behind you on the journey. Maybe they're in a family business, maybe they're not. Uh, but what might just be just a little tip for them? They can wake up and maybe try to pray and think about tomorrow, that they can maybe take a step in the right direction to just be thinking about using their platform in a kind of generous way.
yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned it. Pray about that. Start there. Ask God what that means for you.
Hmm.
Uh, I like to start every day with some quiet time on my knees, just calling out, like, give me wisdom for today. What can I
Right.
do today to honor you with all that you've entrusted to me? And and not be afraid to make, act decisions of obedience that could be really tough. Um, and entrust yourself to God and His sovereignty and His plan for your life, and use your business as a way to bring honor and glory to Him. And
Yeah.
I think just this idea that your vocation is an opportunity to worship the one who made you, and you get to impact all kinds of people. And I think it's just a high calling as any other vocation. To be in business and to impact people's lives, not just employment, but just your day-to-day interactions with how you honor the crown of God's creation by treating people with dignity and love and care and concern, and extending empathy and all the other fruits of the spirit of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and self-control. And those things you will bear fruit when you're living in relationship with God, and that fruit will show up throughout your business and in the relationships that you get to establish as a result of your business. And so, yeah, I just think it starts with the greatest commandment of love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and from there, love your fellow, human being. It's just where no matter where God places you.
I love it. I love it. Just pray, be obedient, trust him, treat people well. And I think the big things happen, right? The old analogy of eating an elephant, it's one bite at a time. It's like just the picture that's coming to my mind is like small acts of obedience when you ask him, and you start stacking the small acts of obedience on a daily basis. They start adding up to something bigger. I think over time, like we get transformed, and it'll go to some place you could never dream.
Beyond what we can ask or imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's part of the adventure. It's part of the excitement.
Exactly.
I think, if you're on this journey in relationship with the God of the universe, and he's prompting you to do things, and he's opening doors for you to walk through. I mean, what's more exciting than that? And he'll teach you on like where to be really generous and sacrificial,
right,
and do all kinds of, you don't just have to figure out with your own intellect how to do these things. His Holy Spirit will prompt you to do things that are part of the journey here, and that's the exciting part, is that we get to an invitation to be in relationship with the Creator of the universe, who desires to prompt us on a day-to-day basis to do things and to be in business, and it's just make concrete whatever it is you want to, he calls you to do. So
yeah, like I'm picturing your dad and his dad empowering you and your brothers, and how much he was rooting for you. Imagine the God of the universe rooting for us as his kids, and he's got everything.
It's a great picture.
I mean, yeah, it is an awesome picture, and he wants us to succeed, in his principles more than any earthly father. So, and he's giving you the business.
When my dad sort of entrusted the business to us, he one of the analogy he liked to use was, he's like a cheerleader like that.
Yeah.
But he didn't want to just leave, just abandon the situation. Right. But he said, I have like the courtside seat to the big game. I just like to spectate now and cheer. And I think that's not to say that God only spectates, because he does so much more than that. But I do think there is some element of that fatherly, loving, who does,
it's
want
the empowerment.
The best for you. Yeah, he empowers you to get on the court, get on the field, do your best, and he's cheering for you, and he's leading you, coaching and mentoring and loving on you, and it's
no fun for you if he does it for you.
Yeah, you. Yeah,
he give you the tools and let you play the game.
I got it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I taught you the shot. Go shoot it.
Right.
That's so fun, man. Well, Marty, this has been a real joy to hear your really your heart and your empathy and this. I just love that you're making it, frankly, less about the business. Businesses are just made up of people.
Yeah.
And if we can transform ourselves,
all about the people.
Yeah, God will help us bless others. So thanks so much. And so, Marty, thanks a lot.
All right. Take care.
And thanks, everybody, for joining us on this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Subscribe, share it with a friend, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.